Welcome, everyone. This is One Flesh Families Ministries International coming to your home, coming to your house, wherever you are. Maybe you're at work, maybe you're cooking, maybe you're washing dishes, maybe you're doing the laundry. Please take this time to call your friends, call your family members, call all your relatives, and let them just get online right now. This is a surprise presentation. It's going to be awesome and wonderful. We want to say thank you to Gospel Body Radio and TV for having us today. We have two special guests to grace this program. You do not want to miss it. We have Ministers Chris and Carmen Garner all the way from Phoenix, Arizona. And they are here for something special. I will just let them introduce themselves, but before I do that, I have my sweetheart, the Reverend,
Junior Scaler.
and we are here with our special guests. They're going to tell you something about themselves. Please hurry, call everybody. Over to Chris and Carmen Garner.
Thank you,
Yes.
Cynthia. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys and to have this time with you. And so we thank you for inviting us. Thank you, Patrick, for including us in this program. And we're looking forward to talking about boundaries today.
Yes,
Okay.
we will be talking about boundaries, but just before we get started, I'd like to say a little bit about ourselves. Chris and I have been married to be 35 years in a couple of weeks, and it started off wonderful. We were new believers. We had both been married before, and we accepted Christ a month before we married, and we thought we had it all together. He has a child from a previous marriage. I had two from a previous marriage, and we didn't realize what we were getting ourselves into. 7 years into our marriage, Chris came home and he said, you know what, I cannot do this anymore. And so that's when I finally decided to reach out to somebody and let them know what we were going through. And my friend prayed with me. She advised her husband about what was going on. And as a result of that, her husband called Chris and wanted to meet with him to talk about what was going on.
And so Lauren was absolutely relentless in wanting to meet with me. And so I finally gave in, said, okay, I'll meet with you. And when we did, he literally stuck his finger in my face and said, you can't leave your wife. And so I went home and said, okay, I'm not leaving, but I don't know what to do.
Well, I had set up an appointment to go see a Christian counselor, and Chris didn't want to go, but I knew I needed the help, and he finally said, you know what, I'm not going to let you go by yourself. And
Well, it's like, why do I want to tell my stuff to some guy? And then when she was going to go for counseling, it's like, well, I don't want him to hear her side without hearing my side. And so we went for counseling, and it was the best thing we could ever do in getting help to work through our issues. And, 27 years later, this is all we do is help couples through counseling and speaking. In fact, tonight with the Gaylords, we're going to be presenting at a marriage conference, family life conference tonight, and we're excited about doing that because we want to see couples have strong marriages. And that's what our ministry, Fortified Marriages, is all about, is helping couples build that strong marriage to withstand the storms that will come against them. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. And so, but he also said we can take heart because he's overcome the world. But it's a matter of learning God's principles for marriage. And that's why we appreciate our brother and sister, Junius and Cynthia, because it's the oneness of heart that we have in building those strong marriages. And so it's just a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Yeah, we're glad that you're here with us today. And before we move on, we just want to remind everyone out there, you're listening live right now. If you are please make sure you send everybody to Peachtree. Actually, it's Peachtree Industrial Boulevard. The address is 7091 Peachtree 7094 Peachtree Industrial Boulevard, Norcross, Georgia 30071. Do not miss this family life conference. The theme is fighting for your family. If you value your family, you will fight to protect and keep your family intact. There's going to be something for everyone, from children to youth to young adults, singles, couples. We'll be having an awesome time tonight at 7, tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. and Sunday at 10 a.m. For singles, it's just a donation of $15. A single parent family with all your children is only $25, and a couple is $25. A couple parent family, everybody is only $35. That's just to cover breakfast and lunch. But it's going to be awesome. You're going to have great presentation, great discussion time, and breakup seminar section. So we invite you all to come out and don't miss it for the life of your family.
Amen.
If you value your family. Well, let me just stop because we're here. I want to ask Chris and Carmen if people have difficulties in their marriages. You say you didn't want anybody to hear your stuff, and that's something that everybody, especially men,
Right.
they say, I don't want people to hear my stuff. You know, they want to take their problems out there, so they suffer. The marriage suffer, the children suffer. Tell us something why people should seek help. You know, why? Why
Well,
should you take it out there, you know?
well, for one, it's biblical. We were created to live in community, there's no lone rangers. We tend to, if you guys remember the TV show many years ago, The Lone Ranger, we tend as a culture to look at the strong, pull yourself up by your bootstrap person as the Lone Ranger and the strong person. But in God's order, we're to seek help and seek counsel. And throughout the Bible, we see that, one, we depend on God, but also that we are to depend on each other.
And unfortunately, very often, we come to church with a mask over our face, pretending that everything is okay. And we're dying inside because we don't want to share with anybody what's going on. And it's a sin of pride.
Amen.
You know, we're
Yeah.
afraid of what people are going to think about us. That, you know, here we are Christians and we're struggling that in this way. And we think that everybody is doing great except for us. And that's a lie from the devil himself, right?
Yes.
And so we suffer in silence, and then before you know it, we end up divorcing and going to different churches, and then we start that cycle all over again.
And again, throughout the Bible, we see that we're meant to live in community. You know, we're meant to work with each other. And in Galatians chapter 6, it talks about those who are spiritual to restore gently those who have fallen to sin, and to carry each other's burdens. And in this way, you fulfill the law of Christ. And so how are we going to know each other's burdens if we don't share that? You know, you guys calling us this week or us talking on the phone and sharing a physical burden that our brother's having so we could pray for him and uphold him. And it goes with emotional and spiritual things too. We're meant to be in community and seek help from each other. And so that's what we're all about, is helping people do that.
And I think that that brings back our theme for this weekend: fight for your family.
Yeah.
And by whatever means necessary, you have to fight for your family. But talking about boundaries, because you had said that's what you will be talking about, and we have been hinting, we have been using this word quite a bit during our previous, talks here. And just want for you to tell us, what do you mean by the word boundaries? What is boundary?
Well, we all know about boundaries. Physical boundaries are easy. We're in a room, we have walls, we have doors. You see those physical boundaries. But what we're talking about are the emotional, those personal boundaries.
That we don't see.
Yeah, we don't see those. And it's much more difficult. And so, in essence, there's three aspects to boundaries. One is boundaries define who I am as a person. And so there's the physical aspects, but then the spiritual, the emotional aspects of who I am as a person. But then also there are the protective boundaries. What is protects me, keeps me from harm. It's a matter of saying yes to the good and no to the bad. And what we tend to do is, as people, we're taught to say no, no to good, oftentimes, and we're taught to say yes to bad. And so it's really unfortunate that we grow up without understanding healthy boundaries.
And unfortunately, a lot of times we don't articulate our boundaries.
Yeah.
And we expect other people to know who we are, what our boundaries, what our limits are. And because we don't explain that, nor do we even articulate them to our children. But we serve a God of boundaries. If you read the Bible, understand the boundary, God is very clear about boundaries. And like, for instance, one of the areas that people will say is that, why would a God of love send people to hell? You know what? God doesn't send anybody to hell. He gives us a choice. And that's basically what a boundary is. It's a choice. And so God says, you know what? The gates to heaven are narrow, and few will find it. The gates to destruction are wide, and many people will go that direction. But he doesn't force anybody to violate his boundaries. It is a choice.
And that's God's boundaries. He won't violate our boundaries and make us do what we don't want to do. We have free will. We have free choice, and so, but we make that choice. I believe it's 1 Corinthians chapter 6, talking about everything is lawful for me, but not everything is expedient or good for me.
Right.
And it's a key boundary verse, because I need to protect myself from me too, and going that wrong direction. I have to train myself and build myself up so that I'm doing things God's way instead of my way.
Now, talking about boundaries, and you have two different people coming together. Each of them have set up boundaries, and they are coming together as one flesh, because we want to look at boundaries in marriage.
Right.
How does it work? How does I'm setting up certain boundaries for myself, and I'm not setting it up for my spouse, and she's probably setting up boundaries also. Now, how do we reconcile or mesh these two boundaries? I want for you to talk a little more on that as far as boundaries.
Well, I'll start, and then you can add or pick up from where I start. So, first of all, boundaries, as you said, Junius, is about self. It's not about the other person. It pertains to who you are, what your boundaries are. And that's a misconception that a lot of people believe that boundaries, you set boundaries on the other person. And that's a myth. Boundaries is about me, about self. Boundaries is about you. Boundaries is about Cynthia. And so one of the mistakes that we make as a couple is that we do not articulate or share what our boundaries are. So let me explain that as an example. Chris and I in the past had a tendency of when we were not happy, we would raise our voice to one another. And we all know that when we do that, we are not hearing one another, we're disrespecting one another, and all we're doing is bickering and defending ourselves. And we finally came up with the decision that we were going to set a boundary that if one or the other yells or screamed at the other, that we were going to say, I perceive that I'm being yelled at. And we agreed that we would take a breath and apologize and start all over. And so, and we decided that if the other person did not lower their voice, we agreed that we would just end the conversation and walk away. Well, we had this situation come up, and I ended up raising my voice, and Chris says, I perceive I'm being yelled at. And what did I say? I am not yelling at you. And I continued to carry my voice, and then got a little bit offended by what he said and got a little bit louder. So he again reminded me, if you continue to talk to me this way, I'm walking away. And I said, don't you dare walk away from me. And guess what? He got up. Yep. He got up and walked out the door. And I'm yelling at him saying, you get back here. Don't you walk away from me. And he closed the door and left. And so how could I argue with him? I disrespected him. I violated his boundary by screaming at him. I didn't do what I said I was going to do, and he followed through. And that never happened again.
Because on that boundary, we had had mixed success with that. And when that happened, it was amazing because we have not had that problem. It's something we agreed to. Okay. But it's biblical. You know, Ephesians 4:29 says, don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, right, but only that which would be helpful for building others up according to their needs. And so we agreed we were going to abide by that. And so when we didn't, we set up how we were going to deal with that. And so I think that's, with couples, it's difficult, but then again, it's not difficult. We have the individual boundaries, you know, protecting ourselves from things like yelling at each other, treating each other badly. Physical abuse is obviously a violation of the other person's boundaries. But we set up, there's consequences for that. Right. And so you have those boundaries between the two of us that are going to help the relationship and not tear down the relationship. And then you have boundaries for the marriage. And that's the type of thing of, you know, what are we going to, choices we're going to make, are we going to build the marriage up or tear the marriage down? As a counselor, I have a boundary that I will not counsel a woman alone because of just a lot of things in my life that I set that boundary. And so I won't violate that because I want to protect my marriage. And you know, what boundaries do we need as a couple to protect our marriage? Facebook and social media are huge today. And so people have, you know, their passwords blocked, you know, their spouse can't see their password. And, you know, we're supposed to, your ministry, One Flesh Ministries, we're supposed to be one. And how can we be one if we have this separate life? Right. And so we set boundaries to protect our marriages also. But between husband and wife, it can be difficult. You know, how do you have one flesh and be one as a couple, but then have boundaries? But the boundaries come, one, to define who I am, right, and realize boundaries is about taking ownership and taking responsibility. Taking ownership for who I am. My personality, the choleric, the lion personality, tends to be very abrupt, very direct, and that can be hurtful to my wife. I have to take ownership for that in my marriage and communicate in a way that is going to build the relationship rather than tear it down.
And not make excuses.
And exactly.
And that's a good point, because many times when there is some tension in the home or some kind of conflict, one person tends to say, "You made me do it."
Yeah.
You know, especially when you have violence, you know, and then he says, "If she had not been so muffy, I you know, wouldn't have slapped her," or something like that.
Right.
And so, but and that was a key point when you said that you must take responsibility for your actions. You know, and that's a very, very key thing. You know, you must take responsibility. But what about the different types of personalities? That, like, someone who may be like a lion type marrying someone who is very, very submissive, or things like that. I mean, how do you work the boundaries out if someone always want to please the other person and doesn't want to rock the boat, and there's this other person that is there dominating, you know, and how can the two of them work it out?
Well, one, you have to understand boundaries and realize that boundaries is like a continuum. And so you have on one side the rigid boundaries. And really, it makes life about me. And so I have these rigid boundaries. I'm selfish, I'm self-centered. I'm going to do things my way. But then you have the other end of the continuum, and that's codependency. And that's life is about everybody else. And neither one's healthy, neither one's biblical. We want to be in the middle of that, and it's going to fluctuate sometimes.
Talking about compromising.
Yeah, well, but it's giving. You know, I give an example. My mother is 80 years old. She lives 30 minutes away from us. Her computer breaks. I don't want to go fix her computer. But no, there's nobody to fix her computer, so, you know, I go fix her computer. That's about giving.
Right.
And we can do that. That shifts that a little bit. But if that's my life, you know, not only my mother, but you and everybody else, I've got to go fix everybody else's life to my own detriment.
Right.
That's where it becomes codependency.
I see.
And so it's having that balance, but it's for a couple, if you have one person dominating, one person always not being submissive, but being subservient,
Right.
that's sin. That is not God's purpose for our marriage. We're to be a partnership. We're to be one. We're to be working together.
Can you please clarify what is the difference between being subservient and being submissive? Because those are two words that sometimes seem to be pretty close to each other.
Subservient is it's all about the other person.
Okay.
You know, it's almost being a slave. You don't have a choice.
Right.
You don't have a choice to whether you can serve that person or not. Being submissive, and especially when it comes to the wife, it's not being a husband's slave and doing everything that he wants.
Or a doormat.
Yeah, or a doormat. You know, being subservient is really being a doormat, where being submissive is a choice we make to go in that person's direction, to be helpful, to love them as God would want us to love them. And, you know, God never asks us to be that doormat or be that subservient person. Slavery is horrible, and when we see that in marriage where you don't have a choice, we have to have the choice. Jesus said, let your yes be yes, your no be no. If you're saying yes because you have to say yes versus whether you have the choice, that's not really love. You know, I ask my wife to get me a cup of coffee. If she says yes because she has to, then that's not giving. But she said,
Grudgingly, she goes, yeah,
yeah. And if she said,
pouting.
right? And so if she says yes, because, like I said, with my mother, sometimes I don't really want to drive 30 minutes and go fix her computer, but I say yes because I love her
Yeah.
and I want to be there to help her.
And I just want to add a little bit more to the boundaries. The person that's very rigid, everything is their way, and they don't give. It's just all about them. And then the other side is where, like Chris said, everything is about the other person, meaning that they are that type of person that says yes to everything. They feel that they can't say no.
No, exactly.
And they feel that, if I say no, I'm a bad Christian, or they're not going to like me, and that's why it's about them too, but it's at the other spectrum. And like Chris said, there's got to be a balance. We serve a God of balance, and we can't just say yes to everything, because otherwise, many times, somebody else is suffering as a result of you always saying yes to everybody and everything.
Well, if I can give another example, because it is about serving, but also having that balance.
Right.
And so we had one gentleman say, well, saying no is not biblical, because Jesus said, if someone asks you to carry their cloak for a mile, you carry it another mile. You're to die to self. And so a lot of times Christians will think boundaries are not scriptural. They're not biblical.
Right.
But God says no to us often.
Yeah.
Yes.
He doesn't say yes to everything. Jesus said no to people. He didn't heal everybody. There was choices made there. And Jesus pulled away from the crowds on occasion. He took his disciples and went up on the mountain and prayed. Sometimes he went by himself, and even though people wanted to be around him, he said, no, I have to have my time with my Father. And so it is scriptural, and there are times when God's going to tell us to turn the other cheek. But there are times when we need to say no, and especially to the bad. We are able and should say no to bad things happening to us. Matthew chapter 18 addresses that. If a brother sins against you, then you are to go to him and address that sin. And it even goes further, and if he doesn't do anything about it, then you take somebody else. And then you take a group of people, and then you throw him out of the church. That's boundaries, and that really comes strongly against those people that would say, oh, boundaries they're not Christian.
Look at Paul when he wrote the church, and he said, there's someone in your midst who is going out with with his father's wife.
Yep.
Kick him out, and
Yep.
and so there are times that you have to take those tough steps, but then that takes me to the point of consequences.
Before we go to consequences,
Yeah.
how do boundaries work? Because we're talking about marriage,
Yeah.
but we're also talking about family. So how do boundaries work between the parents and the children?
Yeah. I mean, we have to have those healthy boundaries. The idea of parenting is helping children become
Go ahead.
becoming God-fearing, God-dependent adults. And so independent of us. And so we have to teach them boundaries. I have a friend who says, I will never say no to my grandchildren. They're going to run out into the street in front of a big truck, and you're not going to say no. Yes, you're going to say no. We have to teach our children about boundaries. And so instant gratification is the big problem, I think, in society today. And so we want to teach our children that no is an answer sometimes, and they don't get everything they want. But at the same token, we have to set those boundaries in our household.
That's good. Well, we've been talking with Chris and Carmen Garner all the way from Phoenix, Arizona. It's going to be great. It's going to happen this weekend at 7094 Peachtree Industrial Boulevard. And when we come back from this short break, we'll continue our discussion on boundaries. Now, for some people, this is a new topic. We never even thought boundaries existed. But we're going to be discussing more about boundaries. So just get your cup of coffee, tea, or whatever you have to do. Run to the restroom and come right back. We'll be right back.
We finally made up our minds and there's no turning back. Oh, we've decided that Jesus is Lord of our lives at last. The decision that Jesus is Lord of our lives must last. So we finally come and this time we're here to stay. Oh, that means we're giving up the world and we're taking the cross to bear. And that means no turning back, no turning, no turning back. And no turning back, no turning, no turning back. And no turning back, though no one joins me, though no one follows anymore. No more turning back, may have to walk alone. Don't wanna lose my soul anymore. No more turning back, you may not join me, you may not follow anymore. No more turning back, may have to walk alone. Don't wanna lose my soul anymore. No more turning back, no turning, no turning back. No turning back, no turning, no turning back. No turning back. So you finally come and you know there's no turning back. You found a personal savior, a counselor. And that means you've surrendered your dreams, your ambitions, your will, your all. That means you've given up the world and you've taken the cross to bear. And that means no turning back, no turning, no turning back. And no turning back, no turning, no turning back. And no turning back, though no one joins me, though no one follows anymore. No more turning back, may have to walk alone. Don't wanna lose my soul anymore. No more turning back, you may not join me, you may not follow anymore. No more turning back, may have to walk alone. Don't wanna lose my soul anymore. No more turning back, no turning, no turning back. And no turning back, no turning, no turning back. And no turning back. You heard me say, you heard me say, you heard me say, I'm not going back. I'm not going back, I gotta keep going on. Got to make it in the number when the children are called to go home. I'm not going back, I'm not going back, I gotta keep going on. Got to make it in the number when the children are called to go home. I'm not going back, I'm not going back, gotta keep going on. Got to make it in the number when the children are called to go home. No more turning back. Heaven, my home, I pray. Heaven, my home, I pray. When the trumpet sounds and he calls on me, heaven, my home, I go. Oh, heaven, heaven, my home, I pray. Heaven, my home, I pray. When the trumpet sounds and he calls on me, heaven, my home, I go. Heaven, my home, I pray. Heaven, my home, I pray. When the trumpet sounds and he calls on me, heaven, my home, I go. Many are called, but few are chosen. I know the King will call on me. The work of life is there to prove. To heaven, my home, I go. Many are called, but few are chosen. I know the King will call on me. The perfect life is there to prove. To heaven my home I go. Heaven my home I pray. Heaven my home I pray. When the trumpet sounds and he calls on me, heaven my home I go. Heaven my home I pray. Heaven my home I pray. When the trumpet sounds and he calls on me, heaven my home I go. Lift your eyes and look up to heaven. There's peace and joy for you and me. Clap your hands and praise the Lord. To heaven my home I go. Lift your eyes and look up to heaven. There's peace and joy for you and me. Clap your hands and praise the Lord. To heaven my home I go. Heaven my home I pray. Heaven my home I pray. When the trumpet sounds and he calls on me, heaven my home I go. I know one morning bright and fair, my earthly troubles I lay to rest. You look for me, but I won't be here, 'cause to heaven my home I go. I know one morning bright and fair, my earthly troubles I lay to rest. You look for me, but I won't be here, 'cause to heaven my home I go. Heaven my home I pray. Heaven my home I pray. When the trumpet sounds and he calls on me, heaven my home I go. Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart feel lonely? And oh, for my heaven and home. When Jesus is my portion, a constant friend is He. His eye is on the sparrows, and I know that He watches me. Oh Lord, I sing because I'm happy. Oh Lord, I sing because I'm free. Free, 'cause His eyes is on the itty bitty sparrows, and I know that He watches me. Whenever I am tempted, oh yes, whenever the clouds arise, oh, and song is placed aside, when hope within me dies, I just draw a little closer to Him. Yes, good, it sets me free. With His eye is on the sparrows, and I know that He watches me. Oh Lord, I sing because I'm happy. Oh Lord, I sing because I'm free, 'cause His eyes is on the itty bitty sparrows, and I know that He watches me. He watches me.
Welcome back, everyone. We are sure you have gotten in touch with many more of your friends and relatives and loved ones because this is such an interesting topic today on One Flesh Family Ministries International production brought to you by Gospel Body Radio and TV. Want to say thank you again to Patrick and Jennifer, Mr. and Mrs. Ansa, for giving us the opportunity to do what we love to do. And we have today two very special persons all the way from Phoenix, Arizona. And they are ministers Chris and Carmen Garner from the Fortified Marriages Ministry. We were discussing boundaries. I don't want to talk too much, so I'll have my sweetheart just come in and they will begin to speak.
Well, just before we took this break, we were talking about boundaries and our children. And so we're at the point of saying, how do you enforce boundaries? But we have said that boundaries are set for yourself. But now, when you have children who are living under your roof, do they set their own boundaries, or do you set those boundaries for them? Could you please clarify?
Well, you start very young children, you set their boundaries.
Okay.
You are, I mean, babies, you're telling them when to eat, when to sleep. You have a schedule for them. And so, but as the idea of parenting is to help them become independent or God-dependent adults. And so they're going to set more and more of their own boundaries as they get older.
But, you know, unfortunately, though, Junius, is that we, as parents, do not articulate the boundaries to our children. And we need to explain that this is a boundary that we, age appropriate, of course, you know, that this is a boundary that we've established. And, you know, like, say, putting their toys away. You know, this is our home. We want our home taken care of in a certain way. And so you say, okay, when you're done playing with your toys, you need to put the toys away. So that's a boundary that you set for yourself. And so then if they don't, you know, you explain to them, if you don't put your toys away, then I'm going to take those toys away and you won't be able to play with them. You know, so it's age appropriate, and as they grow, you allow them to have their own boundaries, but there are boundaries that you set. One of the areas that I think parents are really bad about not allowing their child to have their own boundary is when you tell their child they have to go kiss grandma, they have to go kiss grandpa or uncle or aunt or whoever when they come in or when they leave. And that's a boundary that a child should be able to have on their own. A child may not feel comfortable kissing grandpa or Uncle Sam or whoever. And we shouldn't force our children to have to kiss them. Yes, you tell them, you know what, shake their hand or acknowledge them to be respectful. But to tell them that they have to go kiss them is a boundary that I think even an infant, a young child, should be able to have on their own.
Exactly, and I agree 100% with that, that even small children should have that choice on how physical they get with another person. And if they don't have that choice, I believe it sets them up for sexual abuse, because they're taught that they can't say no. And so my grandchildren, our 2-year-old, 4-year-old grandchildren, they have the choice whether they're going to kiss Papa or not. And if they don't want to give me a kiss, they don't have to give me a kiss.
Now, talking about children, okay, we've been talking about a 2, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, but what about the terrible teens? When the children get to that age where they are looking for their own independence and for their own, you know, to be their own person. identity, and when that boy start getting facial hair and thinks that he is a man, or when that little girl starts growing into a young miss and thinks that she is now ready for life out there. How do you set boundaries for those teenagers?
You want to go?
Well, first of all, um, our responsibility as a parent is to teach our children to grow up to be responsible people.
Yep.
And so age appropriate, as you're teaching them and they're allowing to develop and make choices, you guide them in that. And there are some, everybody's boundaries are different. And so that it's kind of difficult at times, because, for instance, one time our son came home wearing an earring. And that we had said ahead of time that earrings were not allowed and certain music was not allowed in our home.
Right.
What he did outside of our home, we could not control that. But in our home, that's the boundary, was that he was not to have that. Well, when he came home wearing an earring, we told him, you know what, you have to take it off. And he was not happy about that. And so what did he do? He took it off.
He took it. He says, "Well, my ear will close up." I said, "Not my problem. In this household, you were told men don't wear earrings." And so we said, I mean, it's our house, and he can choose to live in our house. At that time, he was, I think, 14 or 15, and so he really didn't have a choice in that. And so we had set that out. We had written down, these are the guidelines, these are the boundaries for you to live in this household.
Right.
And I believe as children become, are coming into adolescence, we have to articulate that and write it down, and because they'll come back and, well, you never told me.
Right.
And our son, he hated that idea. But guess what? When his sister-in-law was going to move into his house, he presented her with, these are the boundaries that for my household,
Right.
and she chose not to move into his house. And so it's important that we do that as husband and wife.
Right.
We sit down together and say, these are the boundaries. This is what's going to happen in our household.
And if the boundaries are crossed, then there were consequences as to
Right.
what would happen if they violated those boundaries.
Right.
But one of the key things that I've got is that you made it known in advance. You put it in writing, and so that everybody will know what were the boundaries,
Yep.
and what would happen if you violated those boundaries.
Exactly.
And so it is very, 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 very important that you don't make it up as you go along.
Oh, yeah.
That you will sit, have a round table conference and say, hey, there's no smoking in my house, there's no drinking in my house, there's no drug use in my house. If you are caught doing it, and again, you are setting boundaries for yourself because that is your house.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so you have to pick your battles and what the boundary is, or allowing your children to have their boundaries, as you mentioned, Junius, based on their age. If a young lady wants to dress, yes, it's like, okay, we can negotiate or talk about some of this. You have to let them have some freedom of choice.
Okay.
And so it just depends on the child and you and what that boundary is going to be and what you allow them to choose.
And along with that, when our son was a teenager, we said, this is the boundary for music. It can't be degrading of women. There can't be foul language. I didn't want secular music in my house, but we believed, the two of us believed, that was his choice. But we had guidelines of what that looked like. And so when he brought it, and I listened to the music. You know, I had to take the time to hear what it was about.
Great.
When he brought a
Great.
tape,
Great.
back in the days of cassette tapes,
Right.
and said, you know, this was his music, and it was very degrading of women. And I said, not in this house. And he says, well, you know, I have to throw it away. That's your choice. You know, I paid money for this. Well, you knew the boundary before you brought the music into our house.
Now, one of the things there are certain parents who will set the boundaries, but do not take the time to let the children know why these boundaries are being set. You know, that's what I say, and that's it, and that, you know. But I think that it is also crucial that you sit and let them know the reason behind setting boundaries as you go along, because you are also teaching them.
Right. Well, and exactly, and it goes back to age appropriate. You know, you want to have boundaries that are age appropriate, and for a 2-year-old, you're not going to tell him why he can't play in the front yard. You know, there's people that will come and steal you.
Right.
You know, you may tell him that, but you know whether he'll understand that. But you know, for a 14, 15, 16-year-old, and do you date or don't date? We want to explain that to them, and so we want to have that discussion when we set the rules and wrote out the boundaries for our teenage son. We told him they're negotiable. We'll talk about it. Some of them,
Right.
Yeah.
but like you said, there's the smoking, the drinking, the drugs. You know, certain pornography that is not allowed. Period, in our house under any circumstances.
Can you talk a little more about consequences? Because every boundary set has a corresponding consequence. Let us look at consequences. Can you please?
That's a difficult one. That's something we have to talk about as husband and wife.
Right.
Some negotiation with teenagers may be available. I mean, may be possible. The drug situation, we had a nephew move in with us, and just like with our children, absolutely no drugs whatsoever. If you do this, you choose not to live here anymore. And so when Carmen was doing the wash and pulled some marijuana out of his pocket, we went to him and said, you choose not to live here. Well, you're kicking me out. No, you made that choice. And so he had to leave within a week.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's a good point, Junius, because sometimes the consequences are difficult. You know, sometimes the consequences are too rigid, or it doesn't fit the crime. And so we have to be in prayer. We have to be united in what we decide, what the consequence is. But here's the key. Here's the key, is that when you set a consequence, you better follow through.
Do not bark and don't bite.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Follow through, because very often, how often do you tell children or people, if you do that again, you're going to get a spanking. If you do that again, you're going to get your car taken away. They do it again, and guess what?
Nothing happens.
Nothing happens. So consequences, don't set a consequence and not be able to follow through.
Same question now. Consequences between spouses. We have dealt with the children.
Right.
Now, how do you handle consequences if your spouse continually violate boundaries that you have set up for yourself?
It's really the same way, Junius. I mean, it's difficult. You know, the consequences that we talked about with yelling at each other. Chris followed through, and he walked out, and I said, don't you dare walk out on me. And he did. But you know what? I learned. Neither one of us yell at each other. If we start going in that direction, one or the other says, I perceive I'm being yelled at, and we lower our tone, or we say, okay, I'm going to take a break, and we'll come back. It's the same way. If you're being physically abused, emotionally abused and you set that consequence and say, you know what, I can't stop you from you treating me this way, but I am not going to allow myself to be in that situation. If I am being abused, I will call the police. I will leave, call somebody, do something to get away from that situation. You do not need to stay in that situation, but you have to follow through. You have to make it clear right from the get-go. If this is done to me, this is what's going to happen. And again, follow through.
And many times, especially in the case of domestic violence, uh, it could be the victim being either the husband or or the wife. Although most times it is the wife, but there are a few aggressive, women are out there. But and many times the wife feels like, especially if she is a housewife, she feels like she has no choice but to bear it. Now here in the U.S., there may be shelters for such women,
Right.
but in the third world, especially in my country, for example, there's no women's shelter. So,
Right.
how does that woman handle the consequence, especially where each time is getting more and more severe? How does she handle the question of consequence?
Well, I think you bring up Liberia, and yes, it's much more difficult in Liberia than here in the United States. In the United States, there's no reason a woman should have to put up with abuse. There's shelters, there's help, there's any number of places she can go to get the help, and it's about her again, that she's not putting a boundary on him, she's protecting herself. And so if he's not willing to get the help that he needs, then she pulls herself away from that. But what comes to mind, when we were in Liberia in 2011 in conjunction with the Franklin Graham Crusade, a woman came to Christ and then came to our counseling people and said, I cannot go home, because she was Muslim and they would literally kill her for converting to Christ. And so the team put together the money to put her up into a hotel for the night, and then talked to pastors who found her a job, found her a place to live, helped her get started in life. That's where we have to come together as a Christian community and say, you know what, we're not doing this. We're not going to allow this. God hates a man covering himself with violence as he covers himself with a cloak. And so physical violence is never should be allowed. It should never be tolerated. A man who does that should be confronted and dealt with.
That's biblical.
It is biblical. It goes back to what we talked about earlier, Matthew chapter 18,
Right.
and dealing with that. But the woman has to trust God, but she has to get help. And so even in Liberia, yes, it's going to be more difficult, and it's going to take more faith. But as this woman stepped out and said, I need help, there was the help for her.
And I think that is where the church has failed
Yes.
in a big way.
Amen.
Because the church usually focuses on building a structure, and all these different programs, fundraising programs. And actually, when the church should be focusing on the lives
Yep.
of the people. And I think that is why we take the family life conferences as something that is needed everywhere. In fact, we rarely pray and hope that every church will have a family ministry, because that is one area that and again, coming back to our country, you know, even there are some pastors that are physically violent, you know, and they are deacons, and you know, and the thing is that the church does not frown on this. You know, they don't call out these people and you know, say what you're doing is wrong. And so there are many people, many women mostly,
Right.
who are being, you know, constantly abused, you know, verbally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And many of them, they have now just say, well, this is my cross.
Well, and that's what's so important about having these types of programs, because it's educating people. Because for instance, I'll share my testimony in that I was physically abused for 12 years in my first marriage on a weekly basis. And the problem with that is that I didn't feel like I had anybody to go to. I was ashamed and embarrassed, and I didn't feel that I could afford to take care of myself and my children. So what did I do? I stayed. I stayed for all those years. And by having programs like this, it educates men and women, mainly women, that they don't have to stay in that situation. There is help, even though it may be very difficult. But, you know, when I finally left, I felt I didn't have anybody to go to. And there was one woman that came to me out of the clear blue sky one day and said, Carmen, if you ever need a place to stay, you have my place to stay. She had no idea what was going on in my life. And yet she planted that seed. And the day that my husband put a knife on my throat in front of my children, I thought at that moment, I'm done. I'm not going to put myself through this anymore. I'm not going to allow my children to see this anymore. And I had a place to go. And I believe that if we think about that and have a plan and pray and seek help, that God will find a way, because he does not want you to stay in that abusive relationship. And maybe, there's no guarantees, maybe if the woman finally takes a stand and walks away or exposes him, maybe he will get the help that he needs.
Right. And that's what I was going to say, is that, you know, Carmen should have set those healthy boundaries much earlier and said, this is not acceptable.
Right.
You know, he would beat her, and then he'd come back and say, oh, you know, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And so, but what she should have said, okay, you know, reconciliation might be possible if you go get help. But it had to be the condition that he had to get the help. He had to get the counseling to work through those issues that would stop that from happening again.
Right.
And if it happened again, now it's time to get the authorities involved.
Right.
Because it's wrong. It's sin. And that's the whole thing about boundaries, is protecting ourselves from that sin. And it's biblical that we do that.
Yeah. And you know, there are many people who feel that if they look for help, if they go out seeking help, it means that it is something shameful.
Yes.
They you know, or pride sets in, you know, and so these kind of people, they will just bear it and keep bearing it and keep bearing it, and sometimes it may end in death.
Yep.
And so when you need the help, go out and seek it, especially from Christian brothers. And our show is basically geared towards Christians. We are talking to the body of Christ.
Right.
And so when one needs help, but then there are also people out there who knows that someone needs help, but they are insensitive
Right.
to that help. You know, they figure so long me and mine are doing all right. Hey, you go ahead and then deal with your own issue.
Right.
But,
But Junius, I mean, it comes back to living in community.
right,
You know,
burden.
we in Ezekiel, what did the Lord tell Ezekiel? If you don't confront this sin, I am going to hold you accountable for that sin. And so we have a responsibility when we know something is going on to reach out and to help that person in sin, that help the person that's being affected by the sin, but also help the person in sin. Galatians 6:1,
Right.
restore them gently,
Right,
help
right.
them be restored to the Lord.
But unfortunately, it's the sin of omission.
Right.
We do not confront the person even though we know what they are doing is wrong. And so it's a very sensitive issue, but, God is very clear in His Word on what we're to do.
And so I have a plea. You have the audience out here. For those pastors that may be watching, make this an issue in your church. Do something to raise this issue and say, you know what? Abuse is not okay. It's sin. We have to address it. And if you are, somebody part of a church, you're not a pastor, bring it up to your pastor. Tell him, this is not okay. Can we address this? Would you address this? And we, as a body of Christ, need to rise up and say, no more. We're not going to put up with this.
No more, no more, no more. Here you have it today. Encouraged to start a family ministry in your church. Encouraged to discuss and bring up the issue of setting up boundaries. And so, my sweetheart, just carry us through as we end this wonderful program.
Well, thank you for being with us. And we have had as our guests Chris and Carmen Garner. They are two persons who are very dear to our hearts, and they have helped the One Flesh Family Ministry to get us to this level where we are. And we say join us again. The next time that we'll be meeting will be on Tuesday at 6 o'clock.
And don't forget, visit their website. I think the information is on the screen. You get more resources to help you in more detail. Thank you again, Gospel Body Radio, for having us here. Thank you, One. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Chris. And my sweetheart, I'm Cynthia Gaylor, and
Julius Gaylor.
thank you.
So we finally come and we know there's no turning back. We finally made up our mind.